season is nearly here, which means millions of people will be heading for national parks and national forests. As it turns out, a few of them won't be coming back.
Each year, hundreds of people are reported missing in our parks and forests. Most are eventually found, but there's a smaller category of cases that never get solved, including a few close to home. The I-Team's George Knapp is here with the story. George.
It's not a revelation to say that people get lost out in the wilderness or in forest areas. We're talking about a different kind of mystery, though. Disappearances that are not caused by predator attacks or criminals hiding out there in the woods or just bad luck. A former cop has put together hundreds of case files regarding clusters of missing persons in national parks where the circumstances are flat out strange. But don't expect any answers from the Park Service.
At the end of the night, I was staying in a motel off the government or off the Park Service land, and I get a knock on the door.
The person who confided in law enforcement veteran David Paulides was a government employee who told one heck of a story about people who vanish in national parks, places like Yosemite, but also national forests, including the Toyabe, west of Las Vegas. In the years since the knock at the door, Paulides has scoured small-town newspaper archives and pestered federal agencies for records. He found so many cases of missing people that a planned book became two, filled with more than 400 cases of people who went into national parks but never came out.
People disappear in the wilds all the time, and we're talking about something different. These were unusual things that don't make sense that happen to cluster together in 3 to 4, sometimes as many as 20, 30 people missing at one location.
The individual cases are strange enough, Paulides says, but stranger still were the reactions of federal agencies when he asked for public records.
And when we FOIA'd them, we got a response back that they don't keep any lists of missing people.
The response was not only no, but hell no, he says. So he began putting his own list together and discovered what appears to be nearly 30 clusters of disappearances in national parks and forests, cases which meet a narrow set of odd characteristics. The people who vanish often do so right under the noses of others, in many cases of kids, their parents' noses.
Being parents and being responsible people, we understand there's no way my son or daughter wouldn't know the way back from being just down the road getting the ball.
But it happens all the time.
It happens all the time.
The missing defy logic. They hike uphill, for instance, often steep climbs. Children as young as 2 or 3 are found a day or two later many miles away and over mountain ranges.
Some kids are found in phenomenal distances away that would make no logical sense to any parent.
Weird things happen to their clothing. The missing often shed their clothes right away, even in bad weather. Clothes are found sometimes neatly folded, but not the people.
The ranger described to me, if you were standing straight up and you just had your shirt or just had your pants on and you melted directly into your pants, that's what it looked like to him. The pants were laying on the ground in a very neat pile.
The missing defy normal search and rescue practices. Bodies are found in places that are all but inaccessible, or they're found in the open, in areas that were repeatedly searched earlier. Bloodhounds or other tracker dogs are often befuddled.
If the dog can't find a scent, that's a red flag. If a dog, a canine dog, a trained dog, is put on the scent at the point last seen, and it lays down and it doesn't want to track anymore, red flag. And that happens more than you think.
Nevada doesn't have a major cluster, but it has plenty of cases. Children who vanished around Lake Tahoe, in the center of the state near Tonopah, and at Mount Charleston. In 1966, 6-year-old Larry Jeffrey of Henderson disappeared while playing with his 2 brothers, setting off a massive 16-day search by as many as 1,000 men. Former Sheriff Ralph Lamb remembers it clearly.
Walked away from camp. Never did hear from him, never did see him, never did find him. We had hundreds of people there working, almost shoulder to shoulder.
There's no large predators per se. So we can't worry about mammals taking him. And he was in a fairly remote area where there's no vehicular access, so there's no car abduction. This boy just walked into oblivion. And in an age where you have aircraft up looking for the boy, you have 800 people scouring the mountain,
You should be able to find him.
That coupled with, if he was deceased, part of that ongoing effort is bringing in cadaver dogs. The odor coming off the body, they should have found that. They didn't.
Other aspects of this mystery are even more bizarre, though difficult to explain in just a couple of minutes. Example, many of the vanished who were found alive are kids too young to speak, or kids who can't communicate because of disabilities. Some who are found alive say they can't remember what happened to them. In his books, David Paulides reports on why some obvious explanations simply don't apply here, but he stops short of giving his own theory or explanation. Paulides says he doesn't want to scare people away from visiting parks, but thinks people need to be made aware. A month ago, we asked the Park Service and the Forest Service for their lists of local missing persons cases. Still waiting. We have links and more information about all this stuff on our website. Check it out.
Hundreds of thousands of people visit national parks each year, but you might not realize that a number of those people go missing.
Yep, that's the focus of a brand new book. It's called Missing 411. Retired police officer David Paulides is here. He logged more than 7,000 hours to investigate the disappearances of 411 people from national parks. Good morning, David. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm doing great.
So 7 years it took you to research all of this. And when first thing I saw in this book we were looking at, and she read a good portion of it, I was able to skim it, the first thing that jumped out to me was clusters. What exactly does that mean when it comes to this book here?
So during the research of finding missing people that disappeared in the rural areas of North America, including Canada, we found that there were 28 different clusters of missing people, geographical clusters, that were never talked about and never known before. And it was a highly unusual find on our part.
Was it something it wasn't talked about because no one had ever really discovered the relationship between all of the disappearances, and you kind of found that there were these clusters that had something in common?
There isn't a lot of statistical data or a lot of public data that's available on missing people, especially historical data that maybe goes back 100 years. And putting the pieces together to see that the clusters come together and there is historical significance to it is something you don't hear about. We didn't understand it when we started.
I was so surprised to find out that one of the longest list of people missing is actually from Yosemite, right? For the western region, in fact. And, you know, it's so close to us. And I was just there in January. Hard to believe. And you say that it's actually been difficult to get some information about the missing cases.
So when we started the project, we understood that the National Park System has a large law enforcement presence. And law enforcement is known to keeping a lot of data. Missing people, homicides, robbery, etc. Well, so we attempted to get information from them through the use of Freedom of Information Act. And we filed dozens of Freedom of Information Act requests for this data. We got information back that they didn't keep lists of missing people locally at Yosemite or at any other national park, and at a national level. And when we requested the data, the national parks came back and stated that they were going to charge us $34,000 for a list of missing people from Yosemite, and they wanted $1.4 million for a list of missing people nationally. And they stated that they just don't keep that data.
That's kind of shocking because it would seem to me like it makes sense that a park, a national park of this size, would be probably the first place where people would go missing. You would need that information. But no, not so much.
I think that they have the information. They don't want the public to know the information at this point. And we work with guys that are heads of large law enforcement departments in the United States. And their statement to me was, these people are not stupid.
Yeah.
They understand the need to keep this information. They just don't want to give it up at this point.
Exactly.
And you said, I was reading in the beginning here, that you actually, this all started just a conversation that you had with the ranger several years back.
Several years ago, about 3.5, 4 years ago, a ranger came up to me and said, hey, there's some disappearances at several parks I've worked at. And I think somebody needs to take a hard look at it, because when the people disappear, there's a lot of publicity on the front end.
Right.
Soon after they disappear, you don't hear anything. There are some young kids under 10 years old that are missing from national parks. You never hear about them. Once they're gone, they're gone. They don't give them a lot of publicity, and it's a very disturbing fact.
It is indeed. And you not only give lists, but you also give pictures
and identities of all these people.
Unbelievable. And again, you can all find this Missing 411, the Western United States and Canada.
And hopefully we can use some of the information from this book to eventually get to the point where we're able to find ways to protect people more. Like, your book doesn't do that, but the information that's in this book can help lead to that.
Walk in pairs, keep your friends close, keep your kids very close.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
David, thanks so much for being here.
Every year, hundreds of people are reported missing in national parks and forests, many of them children. And most are eventually found, whether dead or alive. But a small percentage of the cases, some right here in Oregon, are never solved. The mystery those cases present has one man wondering if there's a common denominator behind the disappearances that have search and rescue crews continuing to scratch their heads.
We turned around and here was this little toddler walking out of the fog with absolutely no clothes on at all.
Well, it's troubling.
Every month in almost every state, people go into the wilderness and don't come out.
Stories like that are what fueled David Paulides. Forever rifling newspaper archives and badgering federal agencies for public records, he's discovered more than 400 cases of people who wandered into the wilderness but never came back.
There are so many missing kids in Oregon, it's ridiculous.
Accounts of children, people, vanishing, seemingly swallowed up by the many endless forests across America, or even later found in ways that defy logic.
These were unusual things that don't make sense, that happen to cluster together in 3 to 4, sometimes as many as 20, 30 people missing at one location.
He's mapped out what appear to be more than 30 clusters of vanishings in forests and national parks coast to coast. Some of those clusters and cases right here in Oregon. All of them documented and described in his 2 books.
According to Oregon State Police, there are 41 missing children in Oregon.
And now also in the movie Missing 411, releasing in a couple of months.
In a lot of these cases, search and rescue, or the volunteers searching people, have already gone over certain areas, not once, not twice, but even dozens of times. And then the child is found there, maybe a year, maybe a few years later.
The search coordinators themselves are baffled by it too. The ones they don't think is criminal in nature.
Once a cop, Paulides got hooked on the inexplicable, intriguing, and mysterious missing persons cases only after a government employee knocked on the door of his hotel near Park Service land and confided in him, sharing stories about people disappearing at national parks like Crater Lake and Yosemite.
The ranger described to me, if you were standing straight up and you just had your shirt or just had your pants on and you melted directly into your pants, that's what it looked like to him. The pants were laying on the ground in a very neat pile.
Just one of many accounts in his books that leave search crews wondering if they'll ever find closure.
And after 7 years of research, we found that they replicate themselves in these geographical clusters around the U.S. One of those clusters being Crater Lake.
10 years ago, Coin 6 covered the search and rescue effort for 8-year-old Samuel Belke, who had a mild form of autism and feared loud noises and bright lights. So when Sammy darted away from his father near Cleetwood Cove at Crater Lake, the many searchers could not use the customary air horns and whistles to try and find him.
Well, Sammy's family has let us know that one of the things he likes to do is to curl up in small spaces. Any of these spaces where you could fit a small person are places that we'd want to be searching.
When him and his dad went up to Crater Lake and they were on a little vacation, the circumstances behind his disappearance and the subsequent inability of the Park Service to find him is unusual. And they brought in canines. Canines couldn't pick up a scent. They brought in air support. They couldn't find him. A multi-day search couldn't locate the boy.
8 years earlier, another 8-year-old boy, Derek Engebretson, vanished from this spot, a densely wooded mountainside above Upper Klamath Lake, not far from Crater Lake National Park.
Now we got a dog up here, I guess. We took some of my brother's clothes, and we got a dog up here that's gonna try to sniff him out or something.
Search and rescue crews spent more than 10,000 hours looking for Derek, but still haven't found a single clue.
When Derek was out there with his dad and his grandpa, they somehow or another, he just walked around, didn't go far. There was snow on the ground. They should have been able to track him, and he vanishes.
That's another case that you search an area, you have good information, you go right to where they were, and they're just not there. I mean, after all this time, They still do a yearly search for that. The search team goes out and does a training, and they'll go back and search that area every year.
Scott Lucas is the search and rescue coordinator at Oregon's Office of Emergency Management. He says it's only 1 or 2% of the missions they launch that don't return answers, but they average about 900 searches a year.
Multnomah County coordinator, he told me personally a couple months ago he's baffled by the ones he can't find. He just, where do they go? Where do they disappear to? Or they just don't want to be found. So, and that comes into play too.
And yet, Oregon does have its share of miraculous and mystifying survival stories also.
Just kind of got tunnel vision, and just kept focusing in on walking down this one road. I really had no idea where I was going.
Cody Sheehy was just 6 years old when he wandered off deep into the Wallowa wilderness. Search crews and 2 helicopters with FLIR technology couldn't find a trace of him in the rugged woods, dampened by a cold mixed snow and rainfall.
In almost all these cases, they bring in helicopters with FLIR, forward-looking infrared radar, to look for heat signatures on the ground. They can't find a heat signature. That's unusual.
But the next morning, 15 hours later and 20 miles away, Cody walked up to a house and asked for help.
I was physically at the end of my rope that next morning, and if I hadn't been in a situation where people found me at that time, I don't know how I would have done for another night out there. I could easily have died.
More than 30 years before Cody's harrowing experience, another astonishing story unfolded near Pendleton, where 2.5-year-old Keith Parkins ran and stumbled over a dozen miles of snow-covered timberland and mountains before he was found 19 hours later, stiff and cold, but alive.
I mean, to me, being a parent, I can't see my 2-year-old climbing over 2 mountain ranges in the dark. That's pretty hard to believe. And there's some cases where little kids are alleged to have walked up to 20 miles overnight or climbed phenomenal heights, 3,000 and 4,000 feet. And those are facts, and it's highly, highly hard to believe.
Yeah, I'm not as overly mystical person. I didn't encounter anything to my memory that was unusual, other than the fact that that situation was extremely unusual.
Sheehy is alive, but the fate of others, like Derek Ingebretson and Sammy Belke, are why Paulides keeps digging for answers.
In Belke's case, we interviewed one of the local sheriffs that was involved 2 days after he disappeared about this incident. And I won't say what he said, but it's in the movie. It's pretty stunning.
At this point, Paulides doesn't offer any of his own theories for what happened. He does tell me his books just report the facts of the missing persons cases and that he doesn't believe in the paranormal per se.